I believe that One Piece is the greatest story ever told. With its masterful world building, addictive storytelling, and what might be the best cast of characters of any series ever, I would find it very difficult for anyone who has consumed it to argue against its greatness. But did you know the creator of One Piece published 6 manga prior to releasing his paradigm-shifting magnum opus? On his rise to becoming the highest-selling manga artist of all time and the Guinness World Record holder for the most comics sold by any single author ever. These accolades have resulted in him becoming the 10th highest-selling fiction author in human history. And we're coming for you, Sidney Sheldon and J.K. Rowling. All that being said, One Piece is still probably even more successful than you think, with the franchise being worth the mind-blowing $20 billion. So just who is the person responsible for this juggernaut of an IP? Well, it is a manga artist named Eiichiro Oda, whose hard work and dedication to his craft has become a thing of legend in the manga industry, with many referring to him as a machine and or a manga genius. But is it true? Is Oda a manga prodigy? Or did he just get lucky catching lightning in a bottle with One Piece? Well, if you make it to the very end of this breakdown, I promise you, you will have the answers to all of these questions and much more. As right after today's sponsor, Global Comic, we will be taking the deepest dive into every single manga that led to the rise of Eiichiro Oda and the creation of One Piece. Global Comics is the best free digital reading and distribution platform on the internet. Whether you are a fan of mangas, graphic novels, regular comics, or webcomics, Global Comics is the perfect site and app for you. It has everything from massively popular series like The Boys, Invincible, and Digimon Liberator to thousands of smaller indie comics. Its library is filled with action series, horror, comedy, and even ecchi series for the more cultured of viewers. Just an overall plethora of different genres and styles that ensures there is something for everyone to enjoy. And if you're an aspiring creator yourself, Global Comics is dedicated to empowering creators with the tools they need to put their hard work in front of new audiences as well as monetize it. As a person who analyzes manga for both a hobby and a job, I was very impressed with the interface for the app. My favorite part is you can switch the reading layout from, let's say, the regular vertical style to a style called panel to panel that allows only the specific panel you are reading to be highlighted. This both prevents you from accidentally reading ahead, spoiling yourself, and it just makes the reading more engaging. So check out Global Comic. Using my custom link in the video description, you'll get 33% off if you decide to unlock the full power of the platform. Back to the video, starting with Wanted. Wanted was the first actual manga Oda created. He first drafted it in 1992, and it would later be published as a one-shot in Massage Jump in 1993 under Oda's previous pseudonym Tsuki Himizu Kikondo. It was an action comedy set in a Western-themed world, and reading it really pissed me off. Just let me explain. Up until now, Oda had been mostly messing around with just doodles of characters and loose ideas for a manga. But as soon as he found out about a manga competition from the legendary manga publisher Shueisha, he decided that he would put something together that was a little more focused. The contest was called the Tezuka Award, and it was given to standout manga artists who the industry should keep their eyes on. Some of the most notable recipients of the Tezuka Award are Takehiko Inu, Nobuhiro Watsuki, and one of my personal favorite manga artists, Yoshihiro Togashi. Around this time, Oda had become infatuated with the classic American Western film Young Guns and the movie's protagonist, Billy the Kid. The movie served as inspirations for why a lot of Oda's future works implement various Western aesthetics, but none more than Wanted. Wanted opens up with the series protagonist Gil Bostar, a notorious and wanted criminal, outsmarting and eliminating several bounty hunters who were attempting to collect the massive bounty on his head. After Gil easily wins the skirmish, he heads into to a nearby town to re-up on food and bullets, etc. Then a would-be assassin attempts to catch Gil slipping to collect the bread on his head, but Gil paints the wall behind the assassin with his blood. In like this smooth, almost Cowboy Bebop-esque way, even though this one-shot came out a decade before the space adventures of Spike Spiegel, Gil begins to flee because he gets called a murderer by the townspeople. And so, here lies his conundrum. Gil is stuck in this cycle of having a high bounty because he has killed people, but he only killed people in self-defense after they tried to take his life to collect said high bounty. But because of Gil's superior gunslinging skills, the bounty hunters inevitably lose their lives, and thus Gil's bounty goes up again, so the cycle continues. It is the whole suffering from success paradox, kinda like Mihawk from One Piece. During this chaos, we get to see the first twist or hook of the story. There is a mysterious guy watching all of this go down, and he is happy Gil escaped because he wants to be the one to take Gil out. The only thing is, bro is a ghost. His name is, or was, Wild Joe. He's the spirit of the former strongest bounty hunter in the world, or at least that's how he tells it. And he is quasi-haunting Gil because he feels that Gil killed him in a cowardly manner and he wants revenge. During the flashback to their duel is where we get a lot of the lore and world building of Wanted, like that Gil only killed in self-defense to make it clear to the police that they shouldn't be putting a bounty on his head. If they stopped, he would stop. He really just wants to live a chill life. We also get to see that Gil is a pretty goofy guy. I think he kind of looks like a mixture between Zoro and Luffy, but his personality is definitely closer to Luffy's and Usopp's. He even picks his nose and flicks his boogers, which is something that Luffy is known to do. In case you didn't know, Oda sometimes even has Luffy do it in a sneaky way that most fans don't even notice. For example, in One Piece chapter 604 on page 13, Luffy picks his nose and then places the booger on Usopp, and then on page 15, we can see the booger is still there, while Usopp is none the wiser. But yeah, after a brief back and forth, Wild Joe starts blasting, and Gil's like, if you're ready, let's go. Oh my god, what's that? And points behind Joe, and when Joe turns around, Gil lands a perfect headshot. This is what I mean when I say that Gil reminds me of Usopp too. He uses tricks and wordplay to defeat his opponents, but it only works because of his extraordinary skill. Plus, his last name is Boss Star, and a lot of Usopp's moves have the word star somewhere in the name. So maybe there's some kind of homage to Oda's original sharpshooter. I didn't find any information on this, but I also kind of felt like Gil looks a little bit like Yusuke from Yu Yu Hakusho, which was serialized just a few years before Wanted, but I could be looking too deeply into things. Let me know if you can see it in the comments. But yeah, because of Joe feeling duped, he can't pass on to the afterlife until he either comes to terms that regardless of how he lost, Gil is so much better than him that he would have lost with or without the trickery, or if he can find a way to kill Joe himself by using his ghostly powers like body possession. It is here that the story starts to get really good, and there is kind of back-to-back twists and stuff, so I won't spoil any more major plot points, but just know the dynamic between Gil and the ghost of Wild Joe is so fun to see, and Oda set it up perfectly in a way where no matter what happens, it feels natural. Whenever they argue or Joe tries to kill Gil, that makes sense because of their history, but when they have to work together or wind up just vibing in their downtime, that makes sense too, because they come from opposite sides of the same gunslinging lifestyle. So they both have knowledge the other would find helpful or stories the other would find interesting. Like how Joe knows about how sometimes police hire hitmen whenever the person they are trying to catch is too dangerous, which is how we get introduced to the legendary hitman Sino Phoenix, who becomes the primary big bad of the one shot. I see a lot of elements in Wanted that Oda carried over to One Piece, the most obvious being the wanted posters and bounties. It can also be seen how some characters in One Piece dress and how some of the towns are designed. Overall, for a first manga, Wanted is very, very solid. The art itself is good, but the world building and characters is what really stood out to me the most. I felt myself eager to learn more about the world and how the supernatural elements would come into play, and what kind of innovative, badass ways will Gil Boss Star get himself out of increasingly difficult situations. All of this is why, while I was reading this, I forgot that Oda created this when when he was 17, a senior in high school. I don't know what you was or will be doing as a teenager, but I certainly wasn't creating award-winning material that would win second place in a prestigious competition. That's right, he won second place, bringing home a 500,000 yen prize. And if Oda already hasn't made me feel bad enough about my work ethic, wait till you find out Oda did all of this in between getting into a serious car accident. 3 days before Oda had to have his manga submitted to the contest, 7 pages of his manuscript were still blank. He had found out about the contest pretty close to the submission deadline. This meant if he was lucky, he would finish just in the nick of time. But then tragedy would strike. Oda was riding in the passenger seat of a car when another vehicle would crash into the vehicle he was in. He says it was 100% the other driver's fault, but Oda still ended up with his head smashing into the car mirror and his blood covering his face and t-shirt. He said it all happened really quick. On the way to the hospital, Oda started thinking how this was his very first time ever riding in an ambulance, which he thought was pretty cool. But by the time he got to the hospital and spent an entire day there, he kept thinking about how he had to have his manga officially submitted in 2 days. So he had to have it finished by tomorrow. So Oda lied to the doctor, telling him he was okay and asked for permission to go home. But the doctor said no, not at least until the next day. When Oda arrived home, he busted out the rest of the draft, but he admitted that while he was drawing it, his nose was hurting really bad. So after he submitted his work to the competition, he went straight back to the doctor where he discovered that the bone cartilage in his nose was indeed broken. But later he found out that he had received the award, which made him feel like it was all worth it. And this acted as his first step towards achieving his dream. Oda says that the way these events played out made him think a lot about, quote, the truth of the universe, which may explain why themes like fate become prevalent in Oda's future works. All this being said, I do want to mention that I am very glad the car wreck wasn't any worse. The world definitely is a better place with a healthy Oda in it. Pretty soon after Wanted, Oda entered Kusho Tokai University in order to study architecture, but all throughout his first year, his main focus was to never stop submitting mangas to Shueisha in hopes of getting one of his ideas picked up for weekly serialization, which is the dream for any inspiring mangaka. However, what Oda didn't realize at the time was that his Tezuka Award placement already pre-qualified him for a slot in the offshoot of the Weekly Shonen Jump called the Monthly Jump. This spot is where Oda would release my personal favorite of his pre-One Piece works, God's Gift for the Future. God's Gift for the Future follows Braun, a very talented pickpocket who somewhat wants to correct his unsavory lifestyle, but he just can't seem to stop his bad habits. Through a series of unfortunate events, Braun ends up being gifted a magical death notebook by the god of this world, whose job it is to kill people by writing their name and how and when they will die in the magical notebook. And if you was thinking during that description, that sounds pretty similar to Death Note, well, that's because you're right, and it does. Although the two series take very different story, plot, and thematical directions after a human comes to possess a magical book that was gifted by a god, I do feel the initial hook of both series feels similar. God's Gift for the Future came out in 1993, and Death Note came out a decade later in 2003. So it is possible the creator of Death Note, Tsugumi Oba, read Oda's one-shot and got some inspiration from it, or it could just be a case of parallel thinking. What do you think? By the way, I love Death Note, so this isn't me trying to take anything away from it. I'm not even the first person to ponder this question. I came across a few Reddit threads that had already discussed this topic while researching it for myself, with one post even referring to God's Gift for the Future as Eiichiro Oda's Death Note. But anyway, back to the actual point of this video. The story's main character, Braun, has unknowingly caught God's attention, who has been keeping his eye on Braun for a while now, and observing him repeatedly relapsing to his criminal ways pisses him off. So after the last time it happens, God has had enough and decides to kill Bronn so that he can scold him in person once he gets to heaven, which admittedly is a pretty extreme punishment for pickpocketing, but it gets even more insane when you hear how God plans to kill Bronn. A meteor. His plan is to go full Madara Uchiha on him. For context, God's hope is that Bronn remembers this lesson in his next life and will be a better person. But things take an unexpected turn when God makes a huge mistake. Instead of writing a meteorite will hit Bronn's house, his angel slash assistant points out that he wrote a meteorite will hit Bronn Cheese, which is a massive department store located in the same city. So God comes up with the idea to use this as a chance to allow Bronn to redeem himself. This is where he gives his notebook to Bronn without explaining who he is, but left enough Easter eggs in the notebook that Bronn should be able to discover its power in the form of him pre-writing a few premonitions. Things like Bronn steps in poop and Bronn gets bitten by a dog. It didn't take too long for Bronn to start thinking this book might be able to predict the future. And so he starts actively trying to avoid the risk of these predictions happening. So when he reads Bronn will fall and then sees a banana, he is like, aha, this must be a trap set up by the old man who gave me this notebook to make me think it's real. But by trying to avoid the banana, he gets in the way of this kid skateboarding and is knocked to the ground. What is interesting about this is that even though it seems like it's written just for the funny gag, and it was funny, it actually made me laugh, it actually touches on deeper subjects like fatalism and hamartia, the paradox of making your fate come true because you try to avoid your fate happening, inadvertently sealing your own fate. Nuanced subjects about the philosophies of free will. You could say I'm looking too deep into it, but concepts like free will and fate follow Oda for the rest of his career. I can't help but to think that all this comes back to that car wreck Oda was in and how it made him think about universal truths and fate. But yeah, because of all the accurate predictions, by the time Bronn reads the last one, he is pretty sure the book is absolute. So he immediately understands the severity of the situation when he reads that a meteorite will hit his local department store on today's date. Bronn does want to warn the people in the store right away, but he is pretty sure that no one will believe him. He even admits that he wouldn't believe him. A few hours later, Bronn is chilling on the roof contemplating what he should do when he starts thinking, wait, if he writes stuff in the book, can he change his own future? But nothing is ever that easy. God appears next to him and says, hey bro, I already know what you're thinking and it doesn't work like that. God explains that nothing that is already written in the book can be changed and that nothing will happen if Bronn writes something new in it. The reason being is that things written in the notebook only come true if they are wrote with the pen of fate, which God keeps in his possession. They have a brief back and forth about whether or not the old dude is actually God, and so God writes Bronn suddenly floats and Bronn starts literally flying away. God actually does it twice because Bronn can't stop trolling him. Can we talk about how overpowered this notebook is now? This is way stronger than Death Note's notebook. The holder isn't just capable of controlling people's deaths, but every action they or even objects make. It isn't bound by the rules of reality or physics. Just imagine someone like Light Yagami having this much power. Or imagine if I had it. I could wield all of you to subscribe to this channel and like this video. Nothing would be impossible for me as a YouTuber. 50,000 subscribers would be possible. 100 subscribers would be possible. 1 million subscribers would be possible. Then I could rule this YouTube world with an iron fist and make all of my haters pay for their past transgressions. I'm just joking. I would like never do that like at all. So you should totally like and subscribe. Anyway, their conversation ends with God telling Bronn about how he kinda maybe was trying to kill him instead of destroying the department store. He goes on to tell Bronn that he is putting the responsibility of saving everyone on him, that this is his last chance at redemption for his criminal lifestyle, and if Bronn fails, God will finish the job of taking his life. This leads to Bronn and the skills he gained as a lifelong criminal attempting to save the day. Everything from this point is just intense action and twist, but what makes this one-shot so perfect is the ending. Oda killed it. Every one of these one-shots I've been reading from Oda have an amazing ending, and they just keep getting progressively better. They are so good that I stopped worrying about One Piece's ending. I know he will nail it because it almost feels like Oda always comes up with a banger ending first, and that everything else is just a catalyst to get to that point in the most exciting and awesome ways possible. Oda's even said once that he's known the very last panel of One Piece since he first thought of the story. My overall thoughts about God's gift for the future is how impressive it is that in a very short amount of time, Oda's storytelling skills improved immensely, along with the characters he creates. I love Bronn as a protagonist. He isn't just the overly good guy you have to root for. He is complex and flawed, but I always favorite these type of main characters over the goody two-shoes saintly types because they are a lot more relatable to me. I am far from perfect, so it is hard for me to relate to a character that is. However, the main reason I called this one shot my favorite isn't because it's the most technically best from what makes a professional manga great. That one's still coming, but it's because it was just really enjoyable and funny. Comedy is hard enough to write in general, and especially so when you are creating something that is going to be digested from cultures from around the world. A lot of comedy is geographically subjective. Something that is hilarious in China may not be funny in Zimbabwe. So the fact that a teenaged Eiichiro Oda was so good at writing gags that they worked on me 30 plus years in the future on the other side of the globe, way before he probably imagined international success. It is just a testament to Oda's talent. An interesting fact about God's gift for the future is that Oda said this was his first manga he ever wrote with the story in mind first. He usually draws his characters first and then thinks of the story and how to use them after. Oda credits his love for character design and creation to why One Piece keeps getting longer and longer. He said that he can't stop himself from introducing new characters once he thinks about them. He has to add them to the story. During the time Oda was creating God's gift for the future, besides college, he was also attending driving school and had a part-time job. But he says that he had to quit his job unwillingly to be able to make the deadline for his manga submissions, but opened up about that even though it was for his manuscript and that something was telling him he had to quit, he still feels bad for the other people that worked at and owned the store. But in retrospect, it's pretty obvious that he was right. That was just his fate. Speaking of, it took me way too long to realize that God's gift for the future is probably Oda playing on the word gift being interchangeable with the word present, and present meaning both a gift and a place in time. If you got that immediately, don't judge me. Just enjoy the breakdown of Oda's next manga because it is the one that changed everything for him. Iki Yoko follows a wandering monk named Guko. The story opens up with him walking through a forest looking for a place to spend the night. He hears someone calling his name, but then he is attacked by a monster. Guko runs away and is able to find a village. Once inside the village, his first thought is to ask a villager if he can stay the night at their house, but he fears if they do say yes, in exchange they will ask him to exterminate the monster he saw earlier. So instead, he asks them if there is like an empty temple or something nearby that he can crash at, claiming that he is in this eccentric phase of his life so he can't sleep in traditional housing. But just like he predicted, the villagers waste no time pressing the monk to slay or exorcise the monster because it is a cannibal who has been terrorizing them. This leads to Guko begrudgingly agreeing to deal with the creature. To show his gratitude, the mayor of the village offers to let Guko stay at his nice, big, cozy house. But that first villager he encountered interrupts, saying that Guko cannot do that because he's in his eccentric phase. Because he can't admit that he lied, he is now forced to stay at the dark and scary temple on the outskirts of the village. He kinda just chills on the steps of the temple scared and keeping lookout because he now knows the monster looming around eats humans. And he is also kinda mad at himself because even though he predicted what the villagers would ask, it was his lies that actually got him into this current situation. And then out of nowhere, a monster appears from above him, causing Guko to scream in terror. Guko begins to beg for his life, saying that he is totally not delicious at all, for real, that he is skinny and doesn't exercise so his meat isn't firm, and that for some unexplainable reason, his bones have extra calcium in them, so they are really hard and yucky. And on top of all of that, he serves Buddha, so if the monster eats him, he might suffer. In the middle of Guko's ramblings, the monster is like, bro, make way please, that's my house behind you. And then it takes off his mask, and oh my god, he's hot. Turns out he is actually the guardian deity of this temple and has been here for 300 years or so. Guko asks, then what's up with the scary mask? The deity says it's because he has been bored lately, so he's been scaring humans for fun. But later we find out that is a lie. By the way, I wanted to point out that that speech Guko gave whenever he was scared reminded me a lot of Usopp from One Piece. As we go manga to manga, you can actually see Oda's character archetypes being formed, and ones he experimented with but didn't really bring back. Like the guardian deity, which kinda sucks because I actually liked his design. We never really see Oda draw characters like this after Ikkyo. It reminds me of the kind of character design that would be in Dragon Quest or Dragon Ball Z. And given that we learned in my The Dark Rise of One Piece video that the late great Akira Toriyama was one of Oda's original inspirations, this could be a homage. Besides, I'm sure you already noticed that Goku and Guko are basically the same name with the second and last letters switched. This video is more about analyzing Oda's actual works and appreciating the evolution of his skills, but if you are interested in his actual life story, inspirations, and controversies, check out my Eiichiro Oda documentary I mentioned earlier after this video. Once inside, Guko and the guardian deity have a conversation, which lays a lot of the groundwork for the final act of the one-shot, for it to make sense and or hit even harder. Then, because of a chain of events, we get to see how good Oda has got at depicting fight scenes and action. The way he illustrates perspective and raw intensity is just so good. But when I seen the scene of Guko crying, I was like, wow, that is the Oda I know. He makes me so emotional by the way he draws other people being sad. He is too good at it. I highly recommend reading Ikkyo because I feel like it really acted as a paradigm shift in Oda's own manga adventure, where it's clear that he could be one of the greats. This is where his characters start looking more and more like the designs that would become One Piece characters, and where we get to see what would become an Oda signature. The genius and unique ways he uses backstories of the past of the story to make the current events even more impactful. It is hard to explain, but Oda has a way to make you sympathize with a character on like a spiritual level. Anyone who has watched or read One Piece knows what I am talking about. From longtime characters like, well, any of the Straw Hats, to quick but impactful characters like the epitome of manliness, Senor Pink. Let me know in the comments which one of Oda's characters' background stories hit you the hardest. Overall, Ikkyo was Oda's most well-written and illustrated manga yet, and the manga industry would agree. Ikkyo would win first place at the 1994 Hop Step Awards. The Hop Step Award is an award that Shueisha gives out yearly to the very best work among all of the hundreds of manga published in their magazines. For example, legendary manga artist Akira Toriyama won this award for his original Dragon Ball manga, and Kishimoto has also won this award for the original Naruto. So the award committee does have an impressive track record for having an eye for talent. Winning is basically an announcement to the entire manga industry that you got the juice. And not to glaze Oda too hard, but I do think it's cool that he won for a manga that wasn't even near his magnum opus. I mean, Oda said that he just started drawing ideas for this manga randomly one day, just because he had the sudden urge to draw a fighting monk. But now in retrospect, he sees the depth in stoic monks being the messengers of justice, whose enemies are villains who corrupt the world. I wonder if this means that Mad and Monkey Rouge will play a much larger role in One Piece than most people think. To wrap this segment up, before we get to Oda's most popular pre-One Piece manga, listen to Oda's editorial notes he left on Ikkyoko. Quote, "The universe works as a whole. The natural movement of the moon and or sun in a day is quiet but powerful enough to touch people's hearts. I love flashy scenes, but I also love sceneries, so I think I'll treasure that as well from now on." I don't have much to say about this statement, but I do find it beautiful how Oda learns so much from his own works. It is like through his manga, we can see not just the manga artist, but the introspective person he is becoming. Monsters. Monsters was a one-shot by Oda that was published in the 1994 Shonen Jump Autumn Special. It would become his most successful manga prior to One Piece, and would eventually even get a full anime adaptation produced by E&H Productions. It would air on Netflix as an exclusive 20 years after the original manga's debut. The story follows a wandering samurai named Ryuma, and what makes it so special is that it is different than every other manga we have mentioned previously, because it is canon to One Piece's lore, meaning that it does take place in the One Piece universe, just about 400 years before the adventures of the Straw Hats. However, we didn't find out Monsters is tied to One Piece until the Thriller Bark arc, which is relayed mostly through Zoro's encounter with Ryuma, where the fans who knew of the one-shot theorized the connection, and then later Oda would confirm it himself in SBS Volume 47. The majority of Monsters takes place inside of a single town that brings back Oda's love for the Western aesthetic. The town's citizens are abuzz because there is a famous swordsman visiting the town named Shirano. Although he has always been known as a skilled swordsman, Shirano became a celebrity after surviving a dragon attack that took place 10 years before the current events of Monsters. The destructive dragon burned the town to the ground, and every citizen was killed but a single girl Shirano was able to save. The girl's name was Flare. Her name is Flare. Flare is now a server at the local tavern and is the catalyst for how our wandering samurai gets mixed up with Shirano and the rest of the plot. Ryuma is crawling around starving and begging for food restaurant to restaurant. He hasn't ate for 5 days, but he is still being denied by all of the establishments until he meets his savior Flare, who decides to feed him. After eating, Ryuma thanks Flare for the delicious food and tells her he will repay her somehow, even if it cost him his life. This was kind of awesome to me because it is kind of crazy how Oda already knew in his stories food would be important. Anyway, around this same time, Shirano, who was also in the restaurant catching up with Flare, decides it's time for him to leave, but on his way out, his sword bumps sheaves with Ryuma's, who gets offended, claiming that disrespecting a swordsman's sword is disrespecting his way of life. Bada bing bada boom, they have a quick duel. Even in this short amount of time, you could tell both of them are very skilled. And it's even fair to say that Shirano even got the better of Ryuma. After Shirano declares he is the victor, he leaves the tavern. Ryuma does attempt to engage him once more because, in his own words, a duel is supposed to be to the death, but he backs off when Flare tells him to stop. What's really funny about Ryuma is that he looks like Zoro, but he acts more like Sanji. He is a hothead with men, but is overly respectable to women. I like him. It's like if Mosshead and Curly Brows wore those fusion earrings from Dragon Ball. The bartender fills Ryuma in on the lore of Shirano, and then Ryuma leaves the bar. As he is walking down the street, another dude bumps into his sword, but this time it's this strange man in clown makeup. And before Ryuma can even scold the guy starts pretending Ryuma stabbed him and goes on a long speech about how cruel Ryuma is for giving him a fatal wound for no reason. And as revenge, he will blow the dragon's horn, which will summon the deadly dragon, so the whole town will die alongside him because he isn't going out solo dolo. So now everyone is mad at Ryuma. who refuses to apologize, claiming he did nothing wrong, which he didn't. But to really sell his act, Clown Dude breaks the horn so they can't call the dragon off. Then Flare appears, who slaps Ryuma, saying that she would have never fed him if she knew what kind of guy he was, aka a murderer. By the way, this slap reminds me a lot of how Nami slapped Sanji that one time. Given the circumstances, I can't really be mad at Flare because she is like really traumatized up from the last dragon attack. And also there are so many twists in this manga, it's hard to know who to trust. Anyway, soon after the slap, Shirano appears and informs everybody that unfortunately the dragon horn was real. He remembers it from the last attack. He says that everyone should leave the town while they can and asks for their permission to allow him to fight the dragon in their stead, even though it will likely claim his life. The rest of Monsters follows Ryuma, Flare, and Shirano's POVs as and when the dragon arrives. If you have any doubts about Oda being a manga genius, by the time Oda made it to Monsters, he was still only 19 years old, but he was already unlocking like 98% of his power. If that's not a prodigy, I don't know what is. It is a very, very good manga, and throughout reading it, you can easily see how he had almost perfected the character designs he would be using going forward. A lot of Monsters' character designs and personalities would be tweaked and then repurposed into One Piece characters. A fun fact about Monsters is that Guko from Oda's previous manga Ikkyoko actually makes an appearance in it as a background character / Easter egg. Oda is known to do things like this, and he even has several long-running gags in One Piece of hiding Easter egg characters in plain sight, like Panda Man, who Oda originally designed for a Kinnikuman character creation contest, but who has gone on to make cameos in everything from the One Piece manga and anime to being a playable character in the first Grand Battle video game. Monsters is a must read. The ending was brilliant. I remember the first time I read it, I was like, damn, he got me again. Because besides One Piece, it was what made me realize that Oda really is a storytelling savant. I do think reading Monsters first is the best way to consume it, at least initially. But with that being said, the anime adaptation is brilliant. So if you prefer the medium of anime, you can't go wrong there either. But also, if you have already read the manga, so you feel like you don't need to watch the anime, you're wrong. The anime version was allowed to add so much to the story since Oda made it canon. Like how Ryuma's sword now has the design of Sushui from One Piece. And at the very end of the anime adaptation, they did something really special to tie it into One Piece. It was awesome and kinda made me a little emotional for some reason. Now for why I believe that Oda is just a machine and so inspirational. The entire time he has been putting out all of these other manga, he has always knew in his heart he wanted to create a pirate-based series and was constantly brainstorming how to make it perfect. In fact, Oda was so self-aware and confident that he said he first started drawing the ideas for what would become One Piece in 7th grade, but that he soon realized that the idea he had for what a pirate's adventure was would be so huge that drawing it in one notebook, much less a one-shot, would be impossible. So he told himself, quote, "I'll leave the pirates alone until I start my serialization at Jump." He says in that moment he had just decided his entire life's path, and as we know now, he accomplished it, proving that Oda himself has future sight hockey. When Oda finally decided he was ready to tackle his dream project, it came in the form of Romance Dawn versions 1 and 2, early drafts of One Piece that would get published. There has recently also been a bunch of Oda's unpublished OG pre-One Piece manuscripts that leaked. So I have a deep dive into all of his unofficial works as well, dropping in a few days, so check back in with the channel for that video if you're interested. In 1996, Eiichiro Oda would take the best ideas from all of his cumulative works and reconstruct them into the pirate story he had always wanted to make. The first iteration came in the form of Romance Dawn version 1. This one-shot is really close to the first few chapters of One Piece, but there are some notable differences. The manga follows Monkey PD Luffy, a young pirate who spots a pirate ship in the distance. He himself is traveling on a small boat that is flying 4 different pirate flags. Simultaneously, the nearby town's villagers are freaking out as they can see that the larger ship approaching them belongs to Crescent Moon Galley, a notoriously cutthroat and villainous pirate captain who is basically a diet buggy. The mayor of the town advocates paying off the pirates to save the town without a fight, but the townspeople argue that the money will not be enough. Plus, it is just them repeating the town's history of giving in to the pirates. Therefore, pirates will keep coming after the town because they are easy pickings. A young blonde girl carrying a sword appears named Shiraku, also known as Silk, and speaks up. She is this story's Nami character. She says that the town should fight, but the townspeople dismiss her, telling her that it would only make the problem worse. Which makes me wonder, what do these people want? They don't want to give the pirates the money like the mayor said, but they also don't want to fight like Silk said. Anyway, the mayor steps in and says that he will go attempt to talk to the pirates, while the majority of the villagers take refuge. As the pirate ship arrives, the townspeople panic at whom they believe to be Galley, but it is actually Luffy who has subdued Galley and his crew and is now searching for a place to eat. Galley claims that he only lost because he was caught off guard, and that he had heard rumors about a guy going around taking over pirate ships. And now that he knows that guy is Luffy, he asks what grudge he has against pirates. Luffy says, "You started the fight with me. All the other pirates did the same thing." This version of Luffy is really similar to Gil Bostar, the protagonist from Oda's first manga Wanted. He is gaining fame for defeating all the pirates that attack him first. And honestly, he's kind of a badass. After he beats them, he takes their Jolly Roger and adds it to his collection. Galley tries to explain that this time Luffy picked the wrong pirate to mess with because he just angered a pirate who will enter the ranks of the best 3, this world's version of the Yonko, the 3 strongest and most feared pirates on the seas. But he realizes mid-sentence that Luffy is no longer there. The most interesting changes are told through Luffy and Silk's conversation after she mistook him for Galley and tried to cut him up. We learned that Shanks is still Luffy's inspiration, but in this one shot, the moment he sacrifices his arm for Luffy is different, with it getting eaten by a shark instead of a Sea King, and there are no mountain bandits involved. Luffy just takes a boat out into the ocean to prove Shanks wrong that he is ready to be a pirate. Oh yeah, after Luffy ate the Gomu Gomu no Mi, Shanks claims it came from the illusion tree, which is something that I don't remember reading about in One Piece. The most extreme difference between version 1 of Romance Dawn and One Piece is the concept of Peace Main pirates and Morganeer pirates. Oda was so close to following through with this idea for his pirates that it carried over to version 2 as well, but I am so glad he dropped it. I'll get to that later. So Morganeers are bad and violent pirates who pillage and loot villages, and Peace Mains focus on beating up the bad pirates and going on cool adventures. Luffy wants to be a Peace Main, which is why he goes around beating up the bad pirates. And as you could probably guess, Shanks was also a Peace Main pirate. I do really like the Silk character. She is brave and stands up for what she believes in, has a cool backstory, and even saves Luffy's life at one point. Also in this manga, Silk doesn't immediately join Luffy's crew. They separate after Galley is defeated, but at the end of the story, we get a shot of future Luffy's crew, and we see him getting woken up by Silk and even Galley, who now works under Luffy. So remember when I said Oda loves his Easter eggs? Well, Crescent Moon Galley has made cameos in the One Piece manga, anime, and even the live action, which is pretty cool because that's something I definitely missed. If you are into OVAs, there was also a Romance Dawn version 1 OVA. It was pretty good. It takes place after the Thriller Bark arc, but before the Sabaody Archipelago arc. It still roughly follows the story of the one-shot, but 9 members of the Straw Hats are already on Luffy's crew, though they aren't too involved in the shenanigans. Now, Romance Dawn version 2 still stars Luffy, but everything else feels so surreal. It's like a One Piece episode of What If. Version 2 also got an anime adaptation, but it was more official, as it was turned into an anime special for episode 907, with these cool pastel colors that give it a real fairy tale vibe, or the feeling you're watching a dream. I liked it. This story still has an off-brand buggy, but this was more like if you ask your mom for a buggy and she said, we have a buggy at home, it would be Six-Sided Spill. That being said, I do think he is a lot more interesting than Galley. We still follow Monkey D. Luffy and another Nami character named Anne, but this time she has blue hair. Let me know which Nami design you like the best, Silk, Anne, or the Nami we got. We open up again with Luffy on a tiny boat, but here he gets introduced to the antagonist after Spiral shoots down a panda bird onto Luffy's boat and then asks Luffy to bring him the bird. This leads to Anne, who is a captive of Spiral, getting mad at Luffy for handing over the bird so easily because the bird, whose name is Balloon, is her friend and the reason she is in this situation. The first major difference between Romance Dawn version 2 and One Piece is this story has straight up magic, or dark magic as Anne calls it. Like Spiral is a straight up sorcerer. Maybe if this version went on long enough, Oda might have been able to explain his powers as a rare devil fruit or something, but I don't know. It's pretty much straight up magic. Besides him using psychic abilities, in some instances, he starts flying around on a broomstick like a witch. Anne tells Luffy how cutthroat Spiral is known to be, and in true Luffy fashion, the first thing he does is make fun of Spiral's head. Then Luffy and Anne both get thrown in a cell. This is version 2's take on the bar conversation from version 1, where we find out that Luffy wants to be a peace main. But this time, instead of Shanks being Luffy's inspiration, it's his grandpa, Garp. That's right, in this story, Luffy's grandpa is a famous pirate and is the one who gave Luffy the straw hat in a Shanks-like fashion. Honestly, it was kind of heartwarming to see how close Luffy and Garp's relationship was in this version. I mean, he still hits Luffy and stuff, but he is nowhere near as violent and neglectful as One Piece version of Garp, who left Luffy in Mountain Bandit Written Forest to fight off animals and toss them into bottomless ravines on the regular. Luffy also explains to Anne that his hat is his treasure because it was always worn by his quote violent grandpa, which leads to Luffy asking Anne what her treasure is. She tells him it's Balloon, since they have been together since she was a little girl. The problem is that Balloon is actually a super rare bird called a rock. In fact, later we find out that he is the last of the rock birds, and that it is said that their blood carries magical powers, which is why they are so valuable, like literally worth several fortunes. The rest of the plot follows Luffy and Anne attempting to defeat Spiral and rescue Balloon. By the way, his name might be Spiral or Spill. V2 is a super interesting story, but there is actually 4 things that I really didn't like about it when compared to One Piece, with the last 2 being changes that I honestly think could have ruined One Piece's chances of becoming as great as it is today. First, this Luffy is kind of an asshole. I mean, our Luffy can be a little dense and even often claims that he is not a hero, but he is still a good guy who would do anything to help those that were good to him, even if it means risking his life. However, V2 Luffy was going to leave Anne locked up after he escaped, only freeing her after she asked. And then when she begged for Luffy's help to rescue Balloon, he straight up says no because it sounds too tiring. In fact, he only helps after Anne gets shot, but even then he acted all nonchalant about it. This Luffy just felt odd. The second thing is, although the Garp stuff was cute, it didn't hit as hard as the Shanks version of Luffy's origins. The Garp idol version felt more like the typical carrying on the family business trope. This concept would make a great spin-off or a super fun filler series, but I think the version of Garp we get in One Piece and Shanks being in the story is essential to Luffy becoming who he is. The next one is the first of the ideas that I think really could have brung One Piece down. The entire magic stuff. I mean, I definitely think knowing Oda, he could have done something really cool with it, but I think devil fruits being the primary power system in One Piece is so much better and is one of the reasons I fell in love with One Piece. It was such a cool and unique power system, it immediately caught my attention. I mean, devil fruit still existed in this world, but the magic being so prevalent would have been weird because we still would have needed Haki to balance out Logia users, and it all just would have been too much. Especially with the animals having magic blood, I don't know. It was cool, but I'm happy Oda reworked his power system into what we got. And the fourth idea I'm so glad he changed was the concept of the Peace Mains and the Morganeers. One of the greatest parts about One Piece is the blurred lines between good and evil. Every character lives in this moral gray area, and it's brilliant. Yes, we still have characters that are more good than bad, and some that are more bad than good, and some characters that are straight up evil. But from Marines to pirates to celestial dragons and every other group in One Piece, every individual character in these groups exists in a spectrum of right and wrong. The story doesn't spoon feed us who to root for like a children's book. It's one of the reasons I like making character analysis videos, because I never know how people are going to react to a given character. For example, Blackbeard is set up to be a major antagonist in One Piece, but in the comments of my Blackbeard victim video, there were a lot of people saying they love him because he lives the most like their version of what they think a pirate should be. But there was others that said they hate Blackbeard. This same thing will and does happen with every One Piece character because they are written in a way that allows us to make up our own minds. I even did a poll where I asked which group would you join if you was transported into One Piece, and the results were a lot more balanced than I thought, with people even explaining things like why they would choose the less popular choices like the Marines, being they would want to be a good Marine like Garp, while others said they would join the Marines too, but for other reasons, like so they could be the most evil Marine yet. To each their own. And being honest, one of the main reasons I hated the concept was just reading Luffy saying, "I'm going to be a peace main," instead of "I'm going to be king of the pirates," felt weird. I didn't like it. But I do like you. So drop peach in the comments, the word or the emoji, to let me know you made it to the very end of the video. And a special shout out to Commander Psy 43 for joining the channel as a fleet commander.